Hi guys! So today we're going to be making a solar oven since it's supposed to be really hot this week and nice and sunny. So you'll need, for this project, you'll need a thin box with a flap on the top. I would highly recommend a pizza box. It makes things much less complicated, but if you don't have a pizza box, I will show you how to do this with something like an Amazon box, so you can see it's only this thick. But if you have a pizza box, it's much easier. You'll also need some aluminum foil, some plastic wrap, a ruler. Although the ruler isn't strictly necessary, it is helpful. Either way, you will need a straight edge at least. Some glue, some tape. I have painter's tape here, but you can just use any type of tape. Something to draw with. I have a pencil, but you could use a pen or a marker, doesn't matter. And I also have some black construction paper here. This is also optional. Depending on what you're planning on cooking in your oven, you may not actually want this. I'm gonna go ahead and add it on mine because I'm just gonna be making some s'mores. And it does help the oven heat up a little bit, so if you're not planning on doing anything complicated, I would recommend using this if you have it. And then, of course, some scissors. Also, if you have a craft knife, it might be a little bit easier to use, but scissors work just as well. So, let's get started. Alrighty, so first thing we're going to do is we're going to be cutting a flap out of the top part of our pizza box or our box. You can see here my pizza box isn't necessarily the most clean because it had pizza in it. So also if I open it up, you can see there's lots of grease here. That's not going to matter. We're going to put stuff over it so it's not going to touch. The main thing you want to make sure of is that there aren't any big pieces of like stuck cheese or bread. Just take those off. You can see I have little bits here and there, but they're basically flat, so little bits are okay, but you don't want any big chunks. Now that we've gotten that out of the way, let's get started. Okay, so first things first, what we're going to be doing is making a square that is 1 inch from every edge. Which I guess if you're using a rectangle box, it'll be a rectangle 1 inch from every edge. Same difference, but we are going to take our ruler, and what you're going to do is line up from the edge, and I say 1 inch. This part doesn't necessarily need to be exact, but it is helpful if you have a ruler, and then you can just make your marks. If you don't have a ruler, you can skip like being exact and such, and just skip to making the straight edge lines, which I will show in a minute. So for those who are using a ruler, you're gonna go ahead, line up your ruler with the edge of your box, go in 1 inch, make a little mark. Then we're gonna do that at about the middle, and then down at the bottom. Boop. And then we're going to go ahead and take our straight edge and so if you're just using a straight edge and not a ruler, you could just line up the edge of your straight edge to the end of the box and just make a line like this. So I think my ruler is actually just about 1 inch wide, so maybe I'll just continue doing that. But you can just line up the edge of your straight edge down and make the line. And I think since mine is about 1 inch, I'm just going to continue doing that. But we're going to do this on all 4 sides. So we have here, and then up here. Okay. And finally on this side. Okay, my lines are very light. So you may or may not be able to actually see this, but we have our 4 lines right here. And what we're gonna do now is take our scissors or craft knife, and we're gonna cut out 3 of the 4 sides. And the way I'm gonna cut it is so that the flap that we're creating, it'll open up the same way that this box will open up. That doesn't matter a whole ton. You can do however you want, but that is how I am doing it. Also, you want to make sure to only cut 3. If you cut all 4, it's not that big a deal. You'll just have to tape one side back together again. So if you do it by accident, not that big a deal, we can fix it, but preferably you don't do it. So I'm just gonna stab my scissors in here on the corner and cut down my line. Okay, so we have our flap now. You can see down here I didn't quite cut super even, but that's not that big a deal. You just want a flap. But you can see here my flap doesn't really want to bend. It wants to bend over at the hinge. So in order to get our flap nice and bendy, what we're going to do is take our scissors or our craft knife, and we're going to score on this final line. And if you don't know what scoring is, it's basically like cutting just a little bit into the cardboard, but not all the way through. And that will make it so that the cardboard has a place to bend, but it's still attached. So I'm just gonna take my scissors, and they're open, and I'm gonna press down. And bloop. Hopefully you can kind of see here, it's cut just a little bit, but it's just cut through just the first paper layer of the cardboard. And now when I bend it, it has a nice place to bend, which this one is, there we go. This one's a little stiff, but, it now has a nice place to bend, and now we have the flap for our solar oven. But if you're using a normal box, what I would suggest doing is cutting out these inner flaps and cutting off this top flap. Then what you're gonna do is take some tape and tape down the center part so that this flap and this flap are connected as like one big flap that will open up this way. And then it's the same thing as I did with the pizza box, where you measure out the side part, and then you'll have the outer rim and the inner flap that you'll be covering with foil, which you haven't seen yet, but for those of you using normal boxes, that's how I would do it with a normal box. With our oven like this, all our food is going to be in here, and it's going to be nice and warm and toasty. But right now we have this giant hole, which means that all the warm air that we're creating, or that we will be creating later, is going to be escaping back out to the outside. So what we're gonna do is put a film over this so that all the warm air stays inside our oven. So for this step, you'll need your plastic wrap and your tape. And I'm gonna move some stuff. What you're gonna do is take your plastic wrap and you're going to cover this entire flap that you just made. And we shall just go ahead and do that. And you want to make sure, so you can see here right now I'll have this much excess. You want it just bigger than your flap because you are going to be taping around the whole edge. So you need to make sure that the tape can stick to the plastic wrap and also the cardboard. So I'm actually going to just back this up a little bit and cut it off. And so, even this one I made a little too big. There we go. So you can see here my plastic wrap is over on the actual like wall part. Not that big a deal. This part will be covered with foil anyways, so it'll be okay, but I should have actually cut this a little bit smaller. I think I'm even gonna shift this down a little bit more. But I have just about 1 centimeter of overlap on these two sides. My plastic wrap isn't quite big enough to fill my whole flap, so I'm gonna go ahead and get another piece and go over. But I think, no, we'll do this first. Okay, so we have our first piece of plastic wrap here, and we are gonna tape down this edge right here so that when we put our second piece of plastic wrap, because I still have a little bit of a gap right here, this one, if we need to move our second piece, won't keep moving around. So I'm just gonna take my tape, and again, you don't have to use painter's tape. If you have clear tape, it actually might work a little bit better, because then if you have some overlap, it's still clear. But I'm gonna measure out for the whole edge, because we don't want this, we don't want any of the heat escaping through holes on the side. So you need to tape the entire edge down so that there's no way for the heat to escape. And I just have it, it's about half, the tape is about half on the plastic wrap, half on the cardboard. And we're just gonna push this all the way down. Okay, so we have this one done. Now, if we have plastic wrap on this side and we have to move this one around, it's not gonna go out of place. Okay, so we're gonna go ahead and measure out our second piece of plastic wrap. And let's see, I'm gonna make it a teensy bit bigger. It's better to have it a little bit bigger than too small, because if it's a little bit bigger, you can just cut it down a little bit rather than having to get a whole new piece of plastic wrap. So, and you can see I laid it down here, but now I have all this excess. So I actually need to take this off again. And this is kind of the fiddly part, but we're gonna go most of the way down. And I just barely have enough. So you can see here, this is just barely at the line, so I'm just gonna pull my plastic wrap just a little bit, try and get it to release. We shall reset it right here. Nope, too much, but that's okay. Okay, so once you're at this point, all the plastic wrap has been set down, and I'm just going around and straightening out the plastic wrap a little bit so that it's nice and tight. You don't really have to do this, I'm just doing it because I feel like it. The main thing is you want that little bit of excess on each edge so that you can tape your plastic wrap down. Okay, so, and it doesn't matter if it's crinkly, this is just to trap in the heat and let the sun through, so it is all good. So I'm gonna go ahead and tape this side, and again, you wanna make sure that you tape the entire side And when you're taping this, I'm gonna pull mine just a little bit tight, because if you have the plastic wrap nice and taut over your hole, then it won't sag down and touch the food that you're trying to cook. If it sags down, it's not that big a deal, but just a thing to be thinking about. So, I'm going to go ahead and do this side. And side. Okay, so we now have our whole thing sealed. Where they overlap, if you have clear tape, you can feel free to tape this down and secure that part too. But just the static cling between the two should be enough to keep those two sealed. One last check before we finish off with this step. You can just open it up and run your hand underneath to make sure that everything is sealed and there's no holes. And I think mine is good. Yes, mine is good. And you can see here it's sagging a little bit back here. That's not that big a deal. So, next step. Let's go ahead and do our flap up here. So for this one, you'll need your aluminum foil and your tape or glue, or both. I'm just going to use tape for this step, but if you feel like using glue, you can. Basically what we're doing is we're going to cover this entire surface with aluminum foil, and this will reflect the sunlight from the sunny day from out in the sky into our solar oven, so that it can heat up and warm up. On this flat part, you want to make sure that the shiny side is the side that is out. So if you look at this foil, right here, this is super shiny, but this right here is kind of dull. You want to make sure that this is the side that is facing out to reflect all the sunlight into your box. So here we go. So we have our flap here, and I'm just going to take foil, and I'm going to talk to you before I take the foil out because it's noisy. So I'm just going to take my foil and fold it all the way around and give a little bit of excess so that I can tape it to the back here. And yeah, so let's do that, and then I will tell you the next step after I move the foil. Okay, so we now have our foil, and this foil you want to try and keep as smooth as possible. If it has a couple crinkles, it's not that big a deal, but the smoother it is, the more easy it'll reflect the sunlight into your oven. If it has lots of crinkles, then the sunlight gets all mixed up and doesn't necessarily go in the oven. You can see here, like right here is nice and smooth, but right here is crinkled because that's where I pulled it to tear it. But now if you're going to use glue for this step, go ahead and put glue on this surface. You don't need to do that, but if you want to, you can. And then for those of you not using glue, or even if you are using glue, you're going to take the edges of your foil and curve them over your flap, and then tape the part that's folded over into place on the back. And then I also put one piece of tape on the top here, which actually this one can be folded over. So if your foil is long enough, this way you can also fold it over on the top and tape it in place. But yeah, so I'm going to do that next. Explaining so that you don't have to listen to tinfoil. Okay, so now that we have this folded over, I'm just going to do a little piece of tape in each of the four corners and on this top part up here. One thing I want to note, if your foil isn't quite long enough to fold over, what you can do is just have a piece of tape that goes halfway on this and then curls around to the back to tape it into place. I've also noticed that down here, I missed the foil a little bit. So because this is on the bottom, I'm not gonna make that big a deal. You do wanna make sure that most of this is covered though. If your flap is like super big and you need to do 2 strips of foil, that's totally cool. You just wanna make sure that this is covered and that it is as smooth as possible. So I'm gonna go ahead and tape this last little bit, and that step is now done. So now we get to work on the inside portion of our oven. So for this part, you will need basically everything. For this first part, you'll need tape or glue. I think I'm gonna try it with glue. I don't know if it'll work super well. And then you'll need your aluminum foil. So if you don't have glue, you can totally use tape loops for this part. On my previous oven, I did it and it worked okay. So this time I'm gonna use glue. I forgot glue last time, which is why I used tape loops. But basically what we're gonna be doing is covering the whole bottom part of our pizza box and all of our walls with aluminum foil. You wanna make sure that your shiny side of your foil is facing up. So it should be shiny on the bottom of the box and shiny on the sides. The best way I think to cover all the sides and the bottom of the box is basically 2 strips that go from, I'll show you. Basically, they're gonna cover this side and this side at the same time and go shoop. I know my foil obviously isn't wide enough for my whole box, so I'll be using 2 sheets. I would suggest measuring out your foil and then putting down your glue on the bottom and on the sides and then pressing down the foil. You'll see all this, but it's gonna be noisy with foil. So, yeah, so I'm telling you now. If you're not using glue for this step, it's just tape loops. So you can do a tape loop on each of, I would do tape loop, tape loop, tape loop, tape loop, tape loop, tape loop, da da da. And then on the bottom part, I would probably do each of the corners and then like 1 in each of the middles. It's not that big a deal. It's just to keep the foil down as you're moving your oven around. Okay, let's get started. And one thing I forgot to mention, so on this top part, it was pretty important to have the foil be really smooth, or as smooth as possible. Down here on the bottom, it's not nearly as important. The main purpose of the foil down on the bottom is just the heat that is going into your food. Instead of being absorbed by the cardboard box, it gets reflected back up into your food so that it gets even warmer inside the oven rather than the box absorbing the heat and making it go away. So yeah, so I have my foil measured out, more or less. I gave myself a little bit of slack. I'm making sure that the shiny side is the side that's facing up rather than this dull side. And basically I'm just gonna push this, I'll do this side first since it's over here. I'm gonna push it down into all the crevices and then curl it over the tops of all the edges. Okay, and I just remembered I forgot to put glue down. So I will do that now. You can also see here I just made a kind of sort of wall. That's because this part will be coming up eventually and that it will be on that wall. Eventually we will be taping this so that it's always there, but I haven't done that yet. Yeah, so I'm gonna go ahead and put down the glue, or if you're using tape loops, put the tape loops down, and then I'm just gonna press this down and press this into the walls that are there so that this is nice and stable, and then we'll do it again for this side. Also, you can see I have some excess here. You could just cut off that excess if you want. You just need to make sure that the inside wall is covered. Or for me, I'm just gonna fold it over and tape it down. So. Okay, so now I'm gonna go ahead and repeat what I just did on this side. So. Well, I ran out of glue, so I guess I'll be showing you the tape loop method as well. Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and stick this part back down. Just rub that nice and down. So for the tape loop method, just get a small piece of tape, curl it over to make the tape loop, and then you're just gonna stick it in the locations where you want it stuck down. So I already have glue on this part, so I'm not gonna put any tape loops, but I will put it on the walls. Okay, so we now have a foil box. And if you're planning, I've heard that you can bake like cookies or pizza in this type of oven, although it does take a very long time for them to bake because it's just solar. If you are planning on trying any of those out, this is where I would stop for the inside portion because this is obviously a cookable surface. And I would also probably, so right now I don't have this taped down or glued down. I would probably glue it down just to make sure that nothing gets underneath. So if you're doing that, go ahead, stop here. If you're not, there's one more step for us to do for this inner part. Go ahead and grab your construction paper and your scissors, and then also your glue and tape is optional, but I would recommend it just so that the paper stays down. I would use glue, except my glue is all gone, so I'm going to be using tape for this part. But basically what we're doing is, so we have this nice foil and it'll reflect the heat back up, but if you add the black paper, what the black paper does is as the heat comes down through, it warms up the paper and makes the oven heat up faster, and then the foil reflects that heat back up into the paper, and so it warms up even faster, and it just makes sure that your food can cook as fast as possible. You don't have to do this step if you don't have the black paper, just the foil is fine, but it's a nice addition if you do. You can see I only have 2 pieces of paper. The one I did before this, I figured I found out that I could just do it with 2, but I had a little gap here. Having a gap, for me at least, isn't that big a deal because I'm only using 2 sheets of paper. If you want, you can fill out the whole thing, but having a little bit of extra space isn't the end of the world. So I'm gonna go ahead and divide these. Oh, I have tape on my paper. Bloop. I'm gonna go ahead and divide these up. So I have one piece filling most of the box, and then I have this one right about there. And this is very inexact. It's just filling the paper. If you have lots of black paper, you could just overlap and overlap. That works just as well, but I'm making use out of my paper. Also, I am tearing my paper. You could totally use scissors for this part. Okay, so now we have this area done. There we go. And then we have this one down here. So you can see this is a little gap. I'm not gonna worry about it. It'll be fine. So now that we have our paper down, we need to, you could just keep it like this, and then you can take your paper out and keep it nice and clean. Because if you're making s'mores like me, the s'mores get really messy and tend to get on the paper. I'm gonna go ahead and tape mine down just so they don't shift while I'm moving my box outside, but it's totally up to you. Or you could even glue them down. But I'm going to go ahead and make some tape loops. So, alrighty. So now our oven is basically done. One last thing you can do, which I think I'm gonna do, is tape up this wall. I'll show you how to do that, and then tape this foil right here onto this back place. So, in order to crinkle, 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 all the craziness. Okay, in order to do that, we have our box here. We're just gonna take our tape. Hopefully this is still in frame for you guys. Boop. And you're just gonna push your box together and have half of your tape on one side and half of your tape on the other side, and press down. And you can see that this side is held up and this one is not. So let's go ahead and do that on the other side. Get a little bit of tape, and I'm gonna do half on this and half on this. Pull that foil over, and wha-bam! Our lid is staying up and we have a nice wall here. So I'm gonna go ahead and add some tape loops to help our foil stay up. Gotcha. Up, flipping up, and you can see some of the windows being covered by my foil. I'm just gonna fold the foil down, which actually I'm just gonna cut it. So if your foil's a little too long, just cut it down or tear it. You don't need to use scissors for this part, but I felt like using scissors. Probably can't hear me over that horrible foil noise. Okay, and our oven is basically done. Look at this. So you'll put your food, whatever you're making, in there, and bloop, bloop, bloop. So there is one thing you can see though that's pretty obvious. Our flap that is supposed to be reflecting the sunlight into our oven is basically covering the flap that is supposed to be, or that is the window that is taking the heat. So there is one last thing to do, and that is to make a support so that it stays up like this. If you just have, if you have a ruler or a paint stick or something like that, you can totally just go like this, and it works just as well. So, or also just whatever you were using as a straight edge, if it's light enough. This works great. This is the easy method of doing it. I also saw a method with 2 straws, and so, or 2 bendy straws specifically. And what you can do is tape them together like this, and then you have one tape down here, and let's take this one. You have one tape down here, one taped up here, and this gives, I probably put them right here, this gives that same open effect, and you also don't have the risk of it blowing in the wind and closing, which I have had experience with. So I would suggest, even if you're doing something like this one, put some tape on here and up here, or at least on here, just so that it doesn't blow over, whoop, like that. And this flap doesn't get closed while you're waiting for your food to cook. Because I did that yesterday, and it was a windy day, and it closed almost every time that I went inside. So, things to be aware of. It isn't super sunny today, so I may not actually be able to show you guys this in action. But if you're for whatever you're cooking, make sure that your box is facing the sun. So like if the sun is over here, or if the sun is over here, you want to face your box this way so that your reflector part is reflecting the sun. And the cooking times can vary a lot depending on how sunny it is, how hot it is just in general, and also what you're trying to cook. So I made s'mores in this, and the s'mores actually turned out really good. So basically for that, you just do a cracker. I used Ritz because we didn't have graham crackers, and then a piece of chocolate and then marshmallow. And I waited until they had cooked to put on the top cracker part, but just place them bloop, directly on your paper, close your box. And one place that I saw, or that I originally saw, said it took an hour and a half for them to cook. When I tried it, it was like 80 degrees outside and super sunny, and they only took 30 minutes to cook. So it's just kind of going out and checking, and if it's done, if it looks done, then it's done. If you're cooking something that is like actually needs to be cooked, like cookies, it's gonna take a lot longer. So normally cookies take like 15 minutes. I would say, depending on how hot it is, check in 30 minutes to an hour. And you know what baked cookies look like. So if they look like they're done, then they're probably done. But you could also just cook them a little bit longer, just to be safe, or, you know, not do cookies in general and just stick with s'mores. Since it doesn't matter how done a s'more is, because everything can be eaten cold. They're just better warm. Other than that, that's this week's craft. I hope you guys really enjoyed making this. It's been a lot of fun. It's really fun to make and use. I made several rounds of s'mores the first day that I did this because they were so good. Yeah, that's it. I'll see you guys next week. Bye!